Hey guys, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge, and I'm really excited that you have decided to take time out of your busy schedules to come and hang out today. We're really grateful for you tuning in. And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have subscribed so that you never miss an episode. But if not, or if you are new to the show, get yourself over to iTunes, Stitcher, animaltrainingacademy.com, or whatever it is you're listening to this podcast on, and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We are bringing you today's episode on behalf of the Animal Training Academy, or ATA membership. If you like the conversations in these podcasts, then I want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people within the ATA membership area, which you can find out more about over on the ATA website. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web classes, plus a huge library of videos and projects to problem solve different training situations. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group, forums area, and WhatsApp chat groups. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour nerds. But we will get started on today's episode, where we will be talking to one Lindsay Wood Brown. Lindsay is a board-certified Associate Applied Animal Behaviourist, ACAAB, with a master's degree in animal behaviour. She specialises in finding solutions for behaviour conditions and consults for animal shelters on the design and implementation of behaviour programs, effective behaviour modification methods, and the development of robust operational strategies to achieve behavioural health for animals within the shelter environment. Lindsay teaches seminars and workshops around the country and serves as a faculty member for Pryor Academy and Clicker Expo. She offers coaching and one-on-one mentorship opportunity for behaviour consultants. Lindsay has a long history of leadership in building high-functioning teams within animal shelters. She served as the Director of Operations for Lynchburg Humane Society, an open admissions animal shelter located in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Her role at Lynchburg Humane included the oversight of all shelter operations, with a strong focus on behaviour and behaviour modification to increase the number of animal lives saved and successfully rehomed. Lindsay served for 8 years as the Director of Animal Training and Behaviour for the Humane Society of Boulder Valley in Boulder, Colorado. She developed Boulder's Humane's Training and Behaviour Department, including their comprehensive behaviour modification program, which focuses on rehabilitating dogs with specific behaviour conditions, including resource guarding, fearful behaviour, body handling sensitivities, separation anxiety, and dog-dog aggression. Lindsay also developed the Humane Society of Boulder Valley's curricula for a wide array of positive reinforcement clicker training classes for community members. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Lindsay to the show today, who is patiently waiting by. Lindsay, good morning/afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ryan. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute honour to have you on the show today, Lindsay, and thank you for taking time to hang out with us geeks here at Animal Training Academy.
Absolutely.
Hey, let's dive straight into the first question today. Could you please take everyone listening back on a journey to where you first learned about positive reinforcement animal training and share with us some stories from some of the first animals you ever worked with?
Sure. I really first learned about positive animal training as a marine mammal trainer. Straight after college, I was hired to work at Dolphin Research Center. And I worked there for, 7 just kind of beautiful years, training dolphins and sea lions. So I, spent my 20s there and really had this, kind of wonderful experience. Learned a ton, kind of got to know some of those, people who ended up being particularly special mentors for me, Pryor, Ken Ramirez. And we had a collection of dolphins. I think we had like 27 dolphins at that point and 3 sea lions. And, you kind of put this 21-year-old in that environment, and I never wanted to leave. It was just it was a really neat opportunity for me to develop those relationships. And, I went to work every day and was just kind of like madly in love with these animals, and it was awesome. And I think, the only thing that really was lacking was that I couldn't like bring them home with me. You can't take the dolphins home like you can your dog. And that was the only thing, that like I kind of missed. And so I ended up getting a dog at that time as well. I got my first dog. And then I kind of really started working with her a great deal and eventually shifted to being, quite specifically focused on dogs. So those were my first experience with positive reinforcement training and kind of first learning about it and how do you do it and, what do you do? And I remember thinking like, there's no way, like, I don't know how to do this. I can't train a dolphin to do a flip and, learning all of those pieces and components and like what's a target stick and how do I use it? And, it was awesome. So I was very lucky.
So when you had your thought, I can't train a dolphin how to do a flip.
Yeah.
What you said you met Karen Pryor and Ken Ramirez?
I did meet Karen Pryor. She came to Dolphin Research Center one point with her grandson at the time. He was a young boy, and they were interacting with one of our older dolphins, Josephine, who kind of has this this long history. She's in one of Karen's books. There's a whole chapter devoted to Joey. And so they came and spent some time with Josephine, and I had the opportunity to meet her and was, like we all were, just totally awestruck. Ken Ramirez, I didn't meet, but he had, at some point in my career there, he had put out the animal training book, and that was like our Bible, right? Like it was the first time that we had something that really kind of like clearly defined all of these things we were talking about. I remember going through that book and like, I still have the original copy up there, and just, highlighting all of these pieces. And so it's kind of neat now to continue to have these mentors, these people who have taught me so much from the very beginning. And in terms of that flip, like I told myself, like, there's no way, I don't think I can do this. How do I do this? So like, I'm going to do it. Right. And I did it. I trained that flip. And then from there, it's like really cool stuff. Like, can we do, blood withdrawal? And I remember teaching Alita, who was a dolphin that I was particularly close to. I taught her voluntary milk collection right after she delivered her first calf. And, the husbandry behaviors are, while they don't look quite as sexy as the flip, they were the pieces for me that where the relationship was, so strong with that animal that we were able to do these behaviors that were, voluntary medical behaviors that we broke down into little tiny pieces. And that whole process was super reinforcing for both of us.
And so going back to young Lindsay Wood Brown, who said, how on earth do I teach a dolphin to do a flip? Mm-hmm. I don't know, but I'm going to do this.
I'm going to do it.
Is that still part? Is this kind of, I don't know what label you would put on that, determination?
Yes, stubborn.
Confidence?
I can be stubborn. No, well, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I think it's that stubborn piece where it's like, I don't think I can, or someone tells me, you can't. And then there's the, like, watch me, I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it. So
is it like you want to show everyone else that you can do it?
No, it's the, like, can I show me, am I actually capable of this? Like, can I really do it? Can I teach a flip? And then I remember, like, when I got Lyra, my dog at the time, and, it was that, I got her in, it was 2000, 2001. And that was this time period where, the people that, those of us who all worked together, right, the kind of, I guess what Susan would say the cultural fog at that time was that dogs, right, can't be trained the same way as dolphins. And I remember getting this puppy and hearing from, colleagues and friends, like, you can't use positive training on that puppy. Like, it doesn't work that way. And that was another moment where I was like, like, watch me. Like, I'm going to try this, And, and that was an outstanding experience for me to see that, like, we can do it. And dogs aren't different from dolphins, at least in our, training methodologies. This is still a highly effective approach. And it's an approach that's, reinforcing for Lyra and reinforcing for me and really outstanding for our relationship. And that, went really well until, she was a year old and started demonstrating some behaviors that we would call aggressive to other dogs. And then I was kind of back in the, okay, now you're now you're told that if you're dealing with aggression, positive training isn't going to work. So it's another one of those moments of like, so now I'm dealing with something that, I'm over my head here, and I'm hearing I need to get the prong collar out. And I did not, get that prong collar out. I didn't purchase the prong collar. I talked to a friend who had heard Emma Parsons speak somewhere. And I think Emma maybe had just written Click to Calm. And my friend said, like, check this out. What you can do is simply feed her if she's aggressing, or you can click her for a moment where she's breathing. And I think that moment for me with Lyra was really, where everything kind of took off for me in terms of, I think I want to focus on dogs. And I think I want to focus on how we can use these methods to help dogs.
How do you deal with two things? Failure, because I can imagine that if you don't have a recipe book in front of you, but you've potentially got a network that you can reach out to, which is I'm picking up as it was an important part of that journey there. But how do you deal with failure, and how do you deal with social pressure? Because I think, like, if you're in that situation, when I'm thinking about other people, I feel part of their journey has been really struggling with that social pressure to kind of be that person that says, no, I'm going to back myself here. How do you deal with failure and that social pressure with regards to wanting to challenge yourself?
That's a really good, big question that was not on our list of topics. How do I deal with failure? I think that my journey so far has been kind of, there's just, multiple failures along the way here and there. And that's just part of it. I think for me, those whatever the failed attempt was, or the failure was it opens up for me an awareness of where there is a gap in my knowledge, right? And knowledge gaps, I think, can be a little painful, and they're also exciting. And I think that when I focus on that piece of it, like the curiosity, right? Like, I didn't do such and such well, or I explained this poorly, or this was ineffective with my dog, whatever that looks like, or, whatever I was saying 5 years ago on a stage is not what I would say now. Like, is that a failure? I don't know, but it's a gap in my knowledge, right? And I like working through those gaps. I like figuring out, like, so this didn't work. What do I need to know? And, like, how do I find the answers, and who can help me? And I think that is where, the support system, I think I have been really fortunate to have a network of mentors that have just, guided, right? That have put up with whatever I was saying that was probably quite inaccurate, and have, kind of oriented me the way I need to go, and provided those little pieces of support that I need. And for me, it's the someone to talk to, right? Someone I can just get on the phone with, or shoot an email to, and say, like, here's what I'm thinking. Does this even make any sense? And then they can, they kind of give me the language. They smooth out the language a little bit, or reflect back at me what I'm saying. And that kind of illuminates the knowledge gaps as well. So I think that is at least how I try to perceive, failure, and how I try to get to move through it. Look at it as a knowledge gap, and, knowledge gaps are things that we can overcome, right? And utilize that support system that I have.
Sometimes it requires bravery to admit that. What do you think? Like, for people,
to admit, yeah.
Well, people that are listening to this, that might be in similar situations.
Sure.
Some of us live isolated places where there's not many positive reinforcement trainers around.
Yeah.
And we feel a pressure to maybe fit into the status quo of the region. And it's brave to step forth and say, to frame it in the way you framed it, which was, failure opens up awareness of where there is a knowledge gap that can be both painful and exciting, and focus on curiosity. I mean, that's awesome. That's so awesome. But I think it's also really brave. Is brave a word that you might use to describe yourself?
No, I probably wouldn't use brave to describe myself. I don't have I'm not like brimming with self-confidence. Like, that's not my, anyone who knows me well knows that about me. I have, I believe in my capabilities, certainly, but I don't think I would say that I am terribly self-confident. I think that there are things that I want to know, right? And there are things that I want to learn. And there's a ton of stuff that I don't know and need to learn. And sometimes it's painful, it really is to say the wrong thing, or suggest the wrong ideas on a stage, or whatever platform you have. And And I think it's all okay, right? Because that's at least has been my journey. And I just think I keep learning, and I know so much more now than I did 5 years ago. And I also realize that there's so much more I need to know that I didn't even realize I needed to know. And I just kind of try to keep moving forward like that. I don't think I would describe myself as brave, but I can be stubborn, and I am excited about learning new things, or excited about like if I look at the past 5 years and the kind of evolution that I've taken in how I might describe emotions, let's say, or how I might describe procedures to change behavior, I have really reorganized a lot of what I thought was the way to do it. I've changed the language that I use, but I love it. I love that is the case, because I think otherwise I would be bored. If everything had been the way I thought it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'd probably be bored by now. Like, it's exciting that I was like totally wrong 5 years ago. Like, that's kind of fun and kind of cool. And I will, absolutely admit that. But don't listen to whatever I said 5 years ago, Ryan.
All right. If it's 2024, then stop listening to this podcast now.
Because hopefully we'll all be different too.
So I'm glad we talked about these, because we're going to unpack this topic of emotions in a little bit. So this skill set and this not bravery but stubbornness that you learned working with the dolphins, you've obviously taken forth into your other roles, and when you went to work at places such as the Boulder Valley Humane Society. You've developed entire programs there. Did you utilize those skills that you learnt working with dolphins in that early area to be stubborn or brave in Boulder and develop these programs? Did you? Because from what I'm reading, from what we have from your bio here, you kind of developed those from the ground up. Is that correct?
Sure, I did, but I had mentors, right? I had people supporting me. It's not like I just was like, look what I created. Here's my protocol for resource guarding. Like, I just created this from scratch by myself. No, I had people, who were reading it for me, helping me scratch out the pieces that were unnecessary. I sent that to Jean Donaldson because, she wrote the book on resource guarding. I think what I'm learning to be better at is reaching out for help. I'm not super great at it, but I know that I have a support system who will help. And when I call on them, right, they help me create something that is much better than I could have created on my own. I don't think I just answered your question, but it's okay.
It's all right. You did.
Okay, good.
And so bring us up to 2019 now. Thank you for sharing a little bit about who you are and
Sure.
how you've come to be Lindsay Wood Brown 2019. What are you up to at the moment? We shared a little bit of it in the bio there, but in your own words, what does 2019 have in store for you?
What do I do? Yeah, what am I doing this year? Well, first and foremost, I'm a mom of 2 little girls, and so they keep me busy. And they certainly help me, kind of practice the behavior stuff I'm trying to do and teach. I consult for shelters quite a bit. Because I worked in sheltering for so long, I'm still really committed to supporting shelters, and I'm really trying hard to give shelters some tools to help them kind of navigate this tricky place that I think the animal welfare field is in now. There's a huge push for the no-kill movement, and at the same time, there is a real need to be socially aware of what a community can handle in terms of the dogs that we put out there. So there's this balance that shelters are trying to find, right? What dogs can we rehome and which ones can we not rehome, and how in the world do we make decisions around that? So I'm very committed to supporting shelters there in terms of those really tough behavior decisions. So 2019 will see me doing a whole lot more with sheltering. I'm focusing quite a bit now on this construct of arousal, which has become hugely prevalent in the shelter community. And we hear about it in other places as well. It's not just in sheltering, but it is, sheltering is a high stakes environment, and the arousal construct has really kind of replaced the dominance construct from 10 or 15 years ago. So that's an area that I'm really focused on. And I think 2019 and 2020 will see me trying to do quite a bit more there to support shelters. And goodness, what else? There's a lot going on. I work for Pryor Academy as well. I'm helping them develop their courses. And I'm going to be speaking at Luminos this year in the UK. And that is exciting. And hopefully this podcast with you will help me kind of think through some of those key pieces that I'm hopeful about presenting there.
Exciting. Seeing some amazing social media coming out of Luminos, because I'm on the other side of the world, so I haven't gone there yet, or been successful in convincing everyone to bring Clicker Expo out to Australasia, but we're getting distracted. So two questions I wrote down. First, we'll miss that one. I was about to say, how does stubbornness come into helping you be a good mum? But let's get past that. You talked about arousal then, because we're going to talk about emotions today, and I think you've kind of segued. You offered some opportunities to segue into this topic really well. You talked about how in 2019 the construct of arousal is going to be something that you're going to be focusing on. And you used the word construct there. So let's potentially start this conversation you and I wanted to have about emotions today with what you mean when you're talking about this. What do you mean when you say construct? And maybe let's use this example of arousal and dominance being replaced by arousal as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What do I mean by construct? Well, so here, I will just put out there that I'm going to, discuss and put forth ideas that really, the foundation was given to me by Dr. Susan Friedman. So I just want to put that out there right now, right? She is that mentor for me who has really helped me organize and reorganize and think through things like arousal, right? Or emotions or food guarding, whatever it might be. And really consider, like, what does it mean when we say something is a construct? And what I tend to see is that, so in the sheltering field, when we talked about dominance, or currently we talk about arousal, what is happening is that we see this suite of behaviors that whatever it looks like, it's undesirable to us, and we tend to blame arousal, right? The dog is doing this because he is aroused. And it's just this word, it's just this label that we've put on this list of behaviors that we see. And, we're blaming a word, we're blaming a construct. And a construct, can't cause behavior, right? Arousal cannot cause behavior. Arousal isn't a thing, right? It's just it's a word. It's not something that's located right there in the animal that we can, push a button and change or increase the volume up or down. So that's really what I mean by construct, is that it's that box, right? And we've dumped all of these behaviors into it, observable behaviors, and then we put our sticky label on it and we write the word over-aroused, or we write the word dominant or fearful, or, whatever it is that we, kind of has our attention at the time. And right now in sheltering, it's arousal.
So a couple of different words that let's potentially start off by defining. We've just talked about constructs there, but we're going to talk about emotions. And the other word you chucked in there is labels. So right. Are these kind of interchangeable, these words, construct, labels, and emotions, or what are the distinctions between those three?
Sure. Yeah, I think sometimes I do use them interchangeably. If I'm looking at some construct like arousal, right? And I do look at it as it's a label, right? That we have placed we've placed that label under this list of behaviors. We could say the same thing for dominance or fear or whatever. But it is a construct, right? It is something it's a word that we have created. It's not a real thing. I can't look inside the dog and find the thing that's called arousal, right? Like, it's not there for me. What I can do, like what my lens of analysis is look at all of the behaviors, list them, and then, if I wish to, I can put that label on there as long as I've defined the label in terms of those observable behaviors. So yes, labels and constructs, and I don't remember what the other one was, but I think sometimes I do tend to use them interchangeably, and here's what I mean when I do that.
And so you're saying that with, for example, the word arousal, we've seen a bunch of behaviours that they're likely undesirable, and we've kind of put those behaviours in a box, and we've got a big label, arouse, and we've stuck that on that box. But we can't go inside that dog and find arousal. There isn't a part of that dog that is arousal.
Right.
So you use the word arousal to communicate to others, but you spend time defining what that looks like first. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So if you're working with some clients and they're like, Lindsay, we need you to come in here because everything's so aroused and it's just arousal and we don't know about arousal and how do we deal with arousal? Like,
right.
where did you jump into that conversation and how do you navigate to get the information that you need to help your clients?
Yes. So if it's a shelter client, right, who's coming to me and arousal is this large problem they're having, then the first thing I'm going to ask is, what does that look like? So help me define what that label means to you. And it may vary somewhat from shelter to shelter or person to person, but there is, there are some generally some things that we see. There's some topography of behavior that is undesirable, the way the behavior looks. So there's jumping, barking, mounting, mouthing. The dog is jumping up and biting clothes, or they're playing with a tug toy and the dog starts tugging on their pants leg instead. There's this just kind of like suite of behaviors that we may, that they may have identified as arousal. And my job is to figure out exactly what those behaviors are. So that's the first part of what I'm trying to get at. And then the second part, and the piece that I think is so interesting and that, for the longest time, I don't think I paid nearly enough attention to, is we're talking about behaviors under specific conditions, right? So where do you see the barking, the mounting, the lunging? Like, what is happening in the environment at that moment that's facilitating the behavior? So that's really the second piece that I get at, right? So the first part is, what are the behaviors? And then the next one is, what are the conditions under which you see them? So that's how I get in there. And then at some point we can keep using the word over aroused if we wish to, or we can, as long as we've defined it, or we can really just start, let's paying attention to those specific behaviors and those specific conditions.
So basically you jump in there and do some ABCs, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Like, I think those ABCs, like, we have to get at them. And that, for me, Ryan, like, that's a lens shift. That's a lens shift in the past 5 years. That's something that I would attribute to Susan and, her kind of, skillfully helping me get to that point, because I'm not trained as an applied behavior analyst. Like, that's not how I kind of grew up in this field. My board certification is in animal behavior, and animal behavior really has been about like differential diagnosis, right? This dog is over-aroused, and that looks like this. And here's a recipe to deal with over-arousal. That dog is a food guarder, right? And, this label. And food guarding looks like growling, snarling, biting, lunging, and here's a recipe to deal with that. So the ABC lens for me is, I would still say, is relatively new. I'm still trying to become more fluent in it. And I think that I have loved this journey, like the past 5 years of working through that, right? So where were my knowledge gaps? Here's a big piece of my knowledge gap. And yay, like, this is exciting. Now, how do I apply this? And what I found is that, God, I really think I was muddying the waters for years by saying, this dog is fearful, or this dog is over-aroused, or here's a recipe for that. It's what I knew. And I think I muddied those waters.
And so you say moving forward in the conversation, you might use the word arousal if it's defined. Do you do that? Do you do that to make conversation easier for everyone? Is that something to help you, or is that something to help your clients, kind of because you're trying to use the same language as them, or like would you potentially rather just remove it completely and just talk about behavior and context, or what is your if you decide to start using arousal again, what is your motivation there?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I do when I first start consulting with a new shelter is get a real handle on what the labels are that they use. And we sit down together and define them together. And my goal isn't like to, kick out the label. Like, I think there's some merit. There's some benefits to having kind of a shorthand, right, language. So when I was working in shelters, my team might come in and say to me, like, Lindsay, we just admitted a dog who's fearful. And because I worked closely with my team and we've defined what fearful looks like to us, I, can make the inference that this dog is demonstrating behaviors that look like a tucked tail, or maybe he is not ambulatory, doesn't want to move down the hallway to the kennel, and his eyes look like this, and his body weight is shifted backward, all of those things. So there is some shorthand there that is beneficial when I'm working in a shelter to be able to say, yes, I agree, this dog is fearful, or thank you for letting me know you admitted a fearful dog. But that shorthand is only beneficial if we have the same definition of fearful. Because if we don't, then it's going to cause, I think, more harm than good. So I think getting the labels defined for the client or the team that I'm working with is important, so that when they do utilize the label as a shorthand, it functions the way we would like for it to.
And then when you're in those teams, did you have kind of a way of extra layers to that communication? Was it like, we've seen a dog that's aggressive and it happened in the X context? Was that kind of an agreed upon inclusion of how you communicated about that, or was that were you more interested in just knowing that shorthand because of the need to be efficient time wise and stuff? Like how did you manage that side of the information gathering?
Sure. Yes. So the information gathering. So while it would be reasonable to say we just admitted this dog who's fearful, right, as long as we have that definition, I'm comfortable with that. When it comes time for, okay, tell me more, I need to know where did you see these behaviors that you're calling fearful? Or if we're talking about something that is described as aggressive, right, what was happening at the moment that the dog snarled at you or attempted to bite, right, lunged forward. So then there's that second piece of, once we've listed the behaviors, what are the conditions under which we see them? So that piece, I think, is it's just massively important. And I think, I just think I probably glossed over that for years. Like, what are the conditions under which I see them? And especially in the shelter field, because there's so much behavior that we see on a daily basis. I mean, there's behavior everywhere. And some of the behavior looks so dramatic. And we tend to go straight to, we need a full plan here. Here's an example. We have a little dog who came in who demonstrated behavior in the kennel that looked awfully stereotypic. So he's repetitively spinning in the kennel. He's bouncing off one wall. He's barking at the same time. There's just a continual spin. And when we look at it, we tend to want to say, we have to do all of this stuff, right, to change these behaviors. And we forget about the conditions under which we're seeing them. And so instead of leading into a 2-week intensive kind of behavior change approach, we just change the kennel. We just put them in a different kennel, right? And then we see a change in behavior. So that piece for me, I feel like I'm trying very hard to just get better at, right? Looking at these behaviors and thinking, what's the first step here? Let's try to change the conditions and see what happens.
So as people who work with clients, we potentially find ourselves in similar situations that we have clients or in a network of professionals even, and we're talking about a dog or a bird or a lion or whatever species we're working with, and get a whole bunch of labels thrown at us. And you've offered some amazing advice already, but for someone who's not as experience, just from they don't have the years behind them, but they understand the logic of what you're saying, and they've got a few examples behind them where they've managed to come to the conclusion, let's just change the kennel. Yes. Because they've looked at behaviour and they've looked at context. What other tips might you give us to work with clients to get that information out of them and come to intervention based on observable behaviour and context? Does that question make sense?
I think so. I'm not sure I can answer. Hold on. Try it. Do it one more time. Make sure it's in my brain.
Let's go one more tip you can give to people who are just potentially struggling with being able to communicate effectively about, or communicating effectively to get the correct information out of people, to remove labels from people's communication. Like if we say, for example, someone might say, "What do you want your animal to do instead?" "I don't want it to do this, but what do you want it to do instead?" "Stop doing that." Like, where does a person in that situation go next?
I know. It's a good one. I think the other question that I tend to use is, what does that look like? That I want my animal to be, I'm just going to come up with something that's not particularly intelligent right now. I want him to be friendly when he sees another dog. So what does that look like? What does that look like to you? To try to get at those behaviors. I don't tend to really tackle the label, especially if I'm dealing one-on-one with a client. That I'm kind of used to dog owners. They kind of put forth the labels first, and that is fine. I don't, do a whole lot of battle right there. It's just for me about like, tell me exactly what you see, and then maybe I'll ask some more, a few more probing questions. What was he capable of eating at that moment, or what did you see? What did his body look like? Where was his tail? What were his eyes doing? Was he barking? Just trying to get at some of the, did you see this behavior or this behavior? Did you see this behavior, this behavior? Okay. So now what do you want? Okay, I want my dog to be friendly. All right. So what does it look like? Right? Tell me more about what it looks like. And then we can start to kind of list some of those behaviors. And I think that process is probably a little bit of prompting, right? And a little bit of kind of focusing their attention at a certain spot. What would this look like right here? To try to help them through that.
I like that, bit of prompting. So we talked about in your past, potentially there's been a little bit of a glazing over of context. Mm-hmm. And so Susan Friedman and others have been singing the song of ABCs and observable behaviour, antecedent consequences, and that is the applied behaviour analysis lens of looking at behaviour, which we're talking about the value of in this podcast today. At the same time, to like kind of frame it that way, we acknowledge that there are other lenses to kind of look at the same behaviour. So one of them might be the neurological lens. Would that be a potential comparison with regards to using more labels to look at behaviour? And you talked about potential value in that. So do you ever like take off your ABA glasses and put on your neuroscientist glasses, and when would you do that, and what are the values of potentially doing that? Are there values for you?
I think where I am, well, first of all, I don't really know much of anything about neuroscience, so we don't want me to put those glasses on. I think where I am is I kind of grew up with the lens of the behavior lens of differential diagnosis, right? And I'm not throwing those away because I think there was value. There was much merit there. I learned a great deal. I think that what I'm trying to do now is really put the ABA lens on and get better at it. And also kind of see I don't know where those two lenses, there are a great deal of similarities. It's just that the ABA lens doesn't muddy the waters as much. And, it's funny to say that. It makes me kind of laugh when I chuckle thinking what in the world was I doing for all those years, right? This ABA lens is not muddying the waters, and it's making things clearer for me. And while I'm not as fluent, it's so darn exciting. And so it's kind of, shifting lenses, trying to get better at one and finding it incredibly useful, especially in terms of conditions. I mean, that piece, I feel like, Susan was saying it to me for years, and I could only hear whatever one piece at a time I seem to be capable of. And it's, I'm sure there's a million pieces that I have not been able to apply yet that she's been sharing. But, the piece about conditions, just that I don't want to go straight to looking at that dog who's spinning in the kennel and thinking I need a 2-week behavior change plan. I want my first thought to be, I see these behaviors in these conditions. So what happens when I change conditions? How can I change conditions? it seems so simple, but it's just so elegant. And I don't think I have it very well. I certainly don't have it as well as I would like to have it, but I'm trying, man.
So you say that you want your first thought to be, and is that just through for you repetition of going in there and going and kind of getting a cassette tape going in your mind that when there's a new animal, you're just like, what does it look like? What are the conditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. I mean, kind of, especially when I'm teaching it to someone else who's in a shelter, someone who works for me, right? Like they might look at it and say like, he's fearful. And I think like, honey, I was right there with you. I know exactly like what you're thinking. And so let me prompt you here. What are the behaviors that you see? And then to get better at listing those behaviors. Okay, so what are the conditions under which we see them? And then we start listing, he's in the kennel. We approach his kennel. We have a camera to his face, like all of those pieces. So yes, it is. It's practice.
So do you think there's a human need to, I'm just throwing out Ryan's hypotheses about life right now, but I want to hear them in Lindsay's words.
Oh, geez.
Like we talk about, arousal has replaced dominance. So it's not like describing behavior in context has replaced dominance. We've just replaced.
Oh, right. Another label has, yeah.
Yeah, like so what is in your words and acknowledging, no one expects you to like have the answers for this, but in your words, what do you think is driving that? Do we just have a need to find a simple solution? Yeah. Is it that kind of removes our responsibility? Like, what do you think's behind that?
Oh, that's a big question. We need Susan because she would have the answer. I won't have the answer. What do I think that is? Man, maybe some of it is just that a little bit of the mystery. We want to ask why is he doing this? And if we can land on a single word answer, maybe it for a long time, for years now, that's given us it's given us either we've been able to come from a place of empathy, right? So we've said he's engaging in these behaviors because he's fearful. And then I think that gives us a little bit of understanding, right? So there could be something there. And it could be that, there's the solution, right? Like we've landed on the answer to that mystery, and that feels reinforcing, right? To have an answer. I don't know. I mean, I'm making stuff up at this point, but I think that, I don't know. I think there are some components there of human behavior, what we find reinforcing, so we tend to do again.
Great answer. Hey, there's a couple of topics we wanted to unpack a little bit more on this larger umbrella of emotions.
Right, we got off track, didn't we? Sorry.
It's a good thing. It's what the show is about. If we stay on track, I have not done my job at all. So we wanted to separate some processes and procedure. So under this umbrella topic of emotions, we wanted to talk about separating processes and procedure, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Can you talk to this for us?
So, okay, yes. So we were going to talk about emotions and separating and processes and procedures. So this is the classical conditioning, operant conditioning kind of interest, that I've had for years now, and really exploring. And this is also part of that journey, the evolution that I've kind of been on, where I was taught, and what I've learned is that classical conditioning and operant conditioning are very separate things, right? And that if we are attempting to change emotions, so we want a dog who is feeling upset or angry or fearful or whatever when we approach his food dish, right? Then we need to change emotions by implementing a classical counter conditioning procedure, right? Because in the literature, it has really been promoted for a while now that that's how that is the strategy or the procedure to change emotions. And if you can do that procedure effectively, then the behaviors will kind of fall into place. And, I utilized this for years. I taught this, this is the procedure. We'll use descents and we'll use classical counter conditioning, and we will change emotion. And we'll know we've changed emotion because we'll see a change in behavior. And this is, over the past 5 years, I've really been focusing on this and trying to kind of get at, I'm not sure that they are separate processes. I think that the processes are just, we can harness one procedure or the other, right? But we can't say that because we're working classically, that classical conditioning is the only thing that's happening. We can't say that because we're working operantly, we aren't also having some associations form. And I think this is problematic for us. Like, I think we're ready to evolve and really say that both processes occur jointly. We can't separate those processes. The best we can do is apply whichever procedure we think is the best fit for our goals, but we can't separate what the animal is actually learning. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And so you're saying you taught this for years, this being...
So what I used to teach and what I used to think were that if I am trying to change an emotion, right? So this dog feels uncomfortable, he's tense, he's angry, or he's upset in some way when I approach his food bowl, that because I'm dealing with what we've considered an emotion, I now have to use a specific strategy. And the strategy that's really been supported in the literature has been a classical counterconditioning and desensitization strategy. Like, that's kind of what I grew up learning, was what I had to apply if I was dealing with something that seemed to be some version of upset or emotional behavior. And I do think it muddied the waters for me. I think it kind of perpetuated this idea that if I was working one procedure, then only that process was happening. And I wasn't as attentive to the operant pieces that were happening as well. And if I look at those times when, I really utilized a CCDS procedure effectively, and if I deconstruct it, the piece that made it effective, I think, was that we trained a very clear operant behavior, and we were reinforcing it. And that was all part of the CCDS procedure. We weren't attentive to it necessarily, but that's what I think made it work. So here's my example. One of the things that I really focused on in my first years in sheltering was food guarding as a behavior problem, because it was rampant, right? And there was all this hysteria around food guarding, and dogs were dying because they were guarding their food bowls in the shelter. And so I really worked for several years on this kind of protocol of, how do we tackle this for each individual dog? And it was this, 6-step protocol, and it was a straight CCDS protocol. At least that's how I wrote it. And each piece of it, each step, we needed to have a conditioned emotional response. And the good news is we clearly defined what that conditioned emotional response should look like. And for me, what I wanted was a head lift out of the bowl, right? A very clear dog lifts his head out of the bowl when I approach him. And I also wanted all of those other, kind of what we call emotional behaviors, like the sweeping tail wag and relaxed neutral body weight and squinty almond-shaped eyes, right? But the big piece for me was that head lift out of the bowl. And while we worked that protocol, right, we would approach, dog would lift its head out of the bowl, we'd provide food. And in our minds, it was just classical counter conditioning. Our approach predicted food. And we weren't attentive to the fact that also the head lift was being reinforced by the delivery of the food. And that, I think, was the key piece. Like, I think that's why it's successful. And I think that, insert that those ABCs, that operant piece there, and that makes all the difference. If I had not been clear about what a CER looked like in terms of observable behavior, I don't think we really would have gotten very far. So I think it's, that's exciting. And there was this paper that I just got my hands on. It came out in 2014, but I just saw it. And it's a really exciting paper to me because it says that, well, it's really hard to read because it's pretty, it's full of jargon and it's very scientific. And sometimes I can get, a little lost in that, but I can read a discussion really, really well. But basically what it says is that your classical counterconditioning procedure is going to be far more effective if an operant response is required to earn that unconditioned stimulus. So there's a contingency in place. Like, your ABCs are a big piece of that puzzle. And I just think that's so cool. Like, we have we have a nice paper to support it. It's this phenomena that we've all been kind of observing and seeing and talking about. And it's been a huge kind of leap for me, to get to this point to say, it isn't just CCDS, like there is operant behavior happening here. We're reinforcing it. And furthermore, I think that's why we're effective.
And so when you're teaching this now, are you spending time on talking about conditioned emotional responses, or are you more so talking about operant processes? I mean, you obviously, we just discussed, we're not going to separate those two things. But where does your talk, everything we've discussed so far, where does your offering of CER come into how you teach now?
Mm-hmm. I think now, so I'll be trying to present this at Luminous, so we'll see how I mesh it. But I think that CER is still, it's very popular, right? And I don't have a problem with someone saying conditioned emotional response. Goodness, I've said it for years, right? But what I want us to do is define exactly what that looks like in terms of observable behavior. So now, if I'm teaching, some sort of food guarding protocol, I tackle it from both sides, right? Here's how I wrote it as a CCDS procedure. And here is what is also going on, I believe. And I think that's why it's effective. So I'm talking about both processes at the same time, and really just trying to kind of share, like, here's how I viewed it before, based on, the evolution that I'm making and the learning that I'm doing from my mentors. Like, here's how I'm looking at it now. And like, cool, right? Like, it's so neat that I like that, like, my opinion changed, or just my ability to talk through it more robustly, hopefully has changed quite a bit.
Fantastic, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in the specific part of the world where Luminous is happening, excited to come and hear you talk more robustly about it later on this year. Can you share with everyone listening where they can go to find out more information about that, when it's happening, how they can get involved?
Yes. The Clicker Expo website, you can look at clickertraining.com, go to the website and see where Luminous is, where it is. It's in Manchester in UK this year. It's in October. And the speakers and our topics will all be provided there.
Exciting times, and I know I'm going to have major FOMO in October this year. My CER to social. Anyway, hey, thank you so much for sharing all of that, Lindsay. That was so much fun for me, and I love that we get this opportunity to share this conversation with thousands of people from all around the planet. That's really exciting for me. We will now head, though, into, sadly, our final question for this episode. Lindsay, at the start of the episode today, you took us back in time to where you first got started. Now I'd like to please ask you to take us this time into the future and share with everyone listening what you would really like to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years in the animal training and behaviour geek and beyond world.
What do I want to see in the next 5 to 10 years? I think first and foremost, I want to see more Ryan Cartledges and Hannah Brannigans, and those of you who are, using your enormous talent to make information accessible to us. I think that it's just a big deal. That sharing the community piece, like that feeling of support and community, that's probably the biggest thing I want to see in 5 years is that, like what you guys have started. In terms of, like animal sheltering, because that's where I spend so much of my time, I want to see shelters have some better tools that help them kind of unpack behavior. I would love for us to get really good at defining labels. I don't think labels are going away. I think we're going to continue to use them for whatever those human behavior reasons are. And I think we can get good at defining them with some more practice. And then the last piece, it's that importance of conditions. Can we get really good at defining the conditions under which we see those behaviors? So those are the things that excite me.
So maybe in the coming years, in your words, and feel free to obviously disagree, do we need to get better at identifying the function of us using labels and the context in which they occur?
I think you might be right. Maybe we should really sleuth into that a little bit and figure that piece out.
More Ryan Cartledges and Hannah Brannigans, that's scary.
I mean, I could keep going. John McQuiggan, we get some more. Ken Ramirez really and Susan Friedman's would be great too. I know. Right?
Yes, let's replicate Susan.
Yes.
Might have to get you on social media more than Lindsay.
Yes. Well, that's where I'm going to need some Hannah Brannigan and John and Ryan help.
We know you're busy there being stubborn with your children, so...
That's right. That is my excuse.
What if I tell you that you can't do it? You can't do social media.
You are so smart, because I immediately am like, watch me.
I don't believe you. It's not going to happen.
This is so good for me. I love it.
Hey, thank you so much once again,
You're welcome.
Lindsay, for sharing everything. It was a lot to cover in a single episode, but I think we've done really well, and it was a lot of fun. We've mentioned briefly just then where people can go to find out more about Luminos, but what about you? Where can people go to find you online, get in touch, get some mentoring, and find out where you're up to, what you're doing?
Yes, you can go to my website. It's lindsaywoodbrown.com. And you can find me on Facebook. It's, it's Lindsay Wood Brown, Think Behavior.
Awesome. And that's your business page, is it?
Yes, that's my business page.
And look out for Lindsay Wood Brown on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube.
Yeah, look out.
And we will link to all of this in the show notes as well for you listening if you want to go to one convenient location to find it all at animaltrainingacademy.com. As mentioned, Lindsay, this has been so much fun. So from myself and on behalf of everyone listening today, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and geek out with us here at Animal Training Academy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
And everyone listening, we, of course, appreciate you tuning in as well. If you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnish, choice-rich ways and defining what their behaviour looks like in the context that it occurs in, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behaviour geeks. Someone else knows that it's time to end the episode as well. There's something there for absolutely everyone. We're looking forward to having you join the tribe. That's it for this episode, though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening, everyone, and you'll hear from us again soon.